All right, hey everyone. We are going to be talking about UX and tech hurdles for artists in the crypto space. If you were here yesterday, you saw me read some very weird poetry probably, and maybe get a poetry book, which you can still get if you were not here, which also has an NFT project with it. But I'm Bailey Reitzel, longtime crypto journalist and also events producer, and now crypto poet recently, so that's cool. And then Sasha, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Sasha Stiles. I'm, as was already said, I'm a poet as well as a visual artist, and I also do a lot of work with artificial intelligence. I'm really interested in natural language processing in particular, which is sort of combination of computer science, linguistics, and AI that's really interesting to me as a writer. So playing with AI tools to kind of figure out how I can sort of turbocharge myself as a poet, and then extensions of my work that kind of take those experiments, those practices back into the crypto realm. So Bailey and I have done a lot of work kind of in that zone, bringing words onto the blockchain and thinking a lot about what it means to kind of explore literature from that perspective. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to tell my story in getting to NFTs, but I wanted Sasha up here just because she's been in the space a bit longer than I have in terms of creating poetry NFTs and art NFTs. So the NFT that is part of this poetry collection is just word NFTs. It is not art at all. I made it on Google Slides. But there's differences in like font and color, and I airdrop these NFTs to folks 4 at a time, and then they can go on this website. I wish I had a picture of it, but go on this website, and there's slots in the website that you can then put that NFT in and make lines of poetry with other folks with the NFT. That process in itself was not super difficult. I am not a developer, so I had a developer work on it. One of the things, and this is what I want you to talk about as well, because you're on Tezos mainly. So we minted on Polygon just so it was cheaper, so it didn't cost me hundreds, tens of thousands of dollars to mint all these word NFTs. But one of the hurdles for doing that was that if you're using your MetaMask on your phone to do this, you then have to add the Matic network into MetaMask. So, that's just 3 more steps that people have to do, and like my crypto newbie friends were just like, what the fuck is going on? Why do I have to do this? So I guess like that is to ask the broader question of how is it on Tezos? How is it onboarding people to Tezos? Because it is, maybe like a lesser known blockchain than say Ethereum or Bitcoin, which there's also Bitcoin NFTs.
Yeah. Is anyone here on Tezos? Like, are you guys familiar with it? Yes. Okay. See, but that goes to show, like, it's not super well known. It's not super familiar, even though I think it's one of the most amazing blockchains and actually very intuitive and very user friendly, in addition to being very eco-conscious. It's a proof of stake blockchain. So I actually, when I first started minting, I actually started on Ethereum. And I was relatively new to the crypto scene at that point. I'd had some poetry published in the metaverse, and I had gotten introduced to the crypto scene through that, but I hadn't done a lot of minting myself. And to be quite honest, I didn't actually have any crypto at that point. I was a little bit more of a traditionalist, I guess, at that point. So I started by trying to mint a poem on Ethereum, and quite quickly found out that it was really expensive and a little bit intimidating for me, I think, for that reason. And because I was so new to the scene, because I was a poet coming into a world where there's a lot happening with crypto art, and there were a lot of crypto artists making money, but there were no writers making money in the crypto space, really. So for me to come in and spend a couple $100 minting something without any knowledge of whether or not that was going to be worth it, if anybody was going to buy it, was really scary. So I kind of quickly decided that Ethereum wasn't going to necessarily be the right place for me at the beginning. So, but rather than kind of get scared away and leave the scene entirely, I did some digging and I found Tezos, and I found that this proof of stake blockchain had really nominal fees to mint, to swap, to do all the things that I needed to do. So it brought the barrier to entry down radically. I still had to do the things like set up a crypto wallet and get myself onboarded, and that was a little bit of digging and due diligence. But the fact that I could then, once I was in that ecosystem, do the things that I wanted to do, publish poems, share them with friends, and do it for pennies basically was just, that was such a radical difference between the different approaches between proof of work and proof of stake, that for me that was like my moment of revelation, saying this is a great place for publishing, for writing in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty powerful to be able to mint an NFT with nominal fees at first. So even the NFTs that I've created, they are not going to be worth anything. I mean, I wouldn't assume they are all for free, and I'm just airdropping them to people. And what I found is, like, in that process, in making an NFT on Polygon with nominal fees, it does make me sort of want to jump into making an Ethereum NFT, but you have to have that initial, like, free onboarding to get used to the process before you're willing to spend a couple $100 minting on Ethereum. So yeah, I don't know if that's a sort of same process for you.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I agree with that. And I will, maybe as another example, so one of the projects that I've been working on for the past few months is that I've co-founded a crypto poetry gallery, Bailey and I have talked about a lot, and it's called The Verseverse at verseverse.com, theverseverse.com. And I co-founded it with 2 other crypto writers, and we were all, again, sort of new to this scene, but what we wanted to do was to make a cross-chain gallery so that we could bring poets and artists and creative coders together from Ethereum, from Polygon, from people that are using all these different blockchains, from Tezos, and bring them together, and then also pool resources so we could help poets who might want to mint on Ethereum and do it in a way where they wouldn't have to make this big outlay without knowing if they'd make it back. So we were able to sort of pool resources there, help them mint with a little bit of support, like monetary support, as well as moral support and the support of an existing community. So I think all that helps too in terms of lowering the barrier to entry on that side.
Yeah, totally. One of the other things I wanted to mention in terms of my process is, okay, so I airdrop these NFTs. So like, let's say I have your ETH wallet, right? I airdrop you the NFT. To do that, I use like Polygon gas, locator, and it says gas, like let's say the high fee is 40. And so what I do is I go in and then edit the gas, and I do ×3 and ×5 for like minimum gas and maximum gas. And it's almost outrageous that I increase it to that amount, like just so much more than I need to, but it's because if one of those transactions gets stuck and I'm just turning out a lot of transactions, that means like the hundreds of NFTs I just dropped are all stuck now, and I'm gonna have to end up like canceling all those and losing some of that gas. And so I just like throw huge amounts of gas at the miners because I don't want them to get stuck. Is that like a similar process on Tezos? I've never minted on Tezos or tried to airdrop or anything. There are moments where I think you have to kind of increase things that way, okay, and it helps. But for the most part, it's not really, again, it's never a huge issue because the costs are so minimal. I mean, that is true. Yeah. Like, even if I'm maxing out, it's only 30 cents. So it's like nothing. Yeah, exactly. And I think for Tezos also, it's a blockchain that's very friendly to high numbers of additions. So I think it's helpful there too. You can mint a bunch of things, you can send a bunch of things, and it's all pretty cheap and it's pretty easy. And again, it's in my experience has been pretty quick. Yeah, totally. I guess broad question, are there tools that you wish were a part of the space for your poetry and art NFTs? Well, yes. Okay. Where to begin? I have a long wish list. So I would go back and say, first of all, that I realize that talking about poetry NFTs, like, this is a pretty niche area, but I do think that there is a huge potential within the publishing world at large to really tap into what's happening in the NFT world. I think the global publishing market is something like $110 billion, and then like magazine publishing is like, I don't know, another 80 billion or something like that. And there really isn't much movement, I think, so far in terms of what's happening in publishing, or what could happen in publishing via blockchain. So I think it is definitely worth thinking about how to get more folks from those industries to come into these ecosystems. And I think, there's a lot to be learned. It's almost like learning a new language for a lot of people. I think, especially when you're talking about the publishing world, the stereotype, which is true to a large extent, is that it's fairly antiquated, and there's a lot of people that maybe are scared of the idea of getting a crypto wallet, and
using technology. So I think one of the things that I really, wish is that there were a little bit more, resources to kind of help them understand and reduce the intimidation to get involved in this space, angled specifically towards them. I think there's a lot of resources to onboard artists, and then, there aren't as many for folks like in my world. So I kind of had to figure that out for myself and kind of figure out, well, what could you use an NFT for as a writer? So I think as we kind of continue, it's a matter of developing more of those resources. So that's one thing. But, to kind of like veer over more into the logistical and the technical, I think again there are a lot of writers who would really like to get involved and would like to mint their own works, but maybe don't quite know if they should do it on a platform, because there aren't really many platforms that are dedicated to writers. There's lots of places, again, to go and mint things as an artist, but if you're a writer, you don't kind of know where to go. So like for myself, I wish that I had, a better way to do my own smart contract, and there are now more ways to do that. But figuring out those kinds of really technical details as someone who's coming from more of a literature and language background, and not coming from a coding background, not coming from a computer science background or anything, to me it's a little daunting to think about how do I create my own smart contract and deploy it. So I think again, like resources to make those things very user friendly that are purpose built for things like publishing a zine or publishing a book or publishing a poem. There aren't really any that are custom built for those end usages quite yet that I'm aware of. And there are some that are in development, so we're beginning to see some changes there. But those are a few that I would think of off the top of my head. What do you think? What are you in need of?
I mean, yeah, I think resources is it's an interesting suggestion, and the guy from Gala Games was also talking about this. There's sort of this narrative, and I do not mean to like rain on anybody's parade. Education is key, but like there's so many people who say like education is key, but yet it's like people have to, one, be willing to learn, to think they can learn, and to also have time to learn. And like if you're just, there is educational content out there for like everything, but it also doesn't necessarily speak to these specific audiences, and that's sort of what you want to do, right? I don't want to go to a what is NFTs article and it'd be like NFTs are non-fungible tokens, right? That's not how I even learned about the space. So if I saw it via, this is kind of a digression from what we're talking about, but anyway, if I came into the space because of like the SNL skit, for instance, like that should be the top of the article, which makes the job of like publishing these resources actually pretty challenging, because you have to like retop every article based on how people came in. Because people, they're not zero people, right? They just didn't get birthed and were like, but I don't know, what's an NFT? So you sort of want to talk to them in a way where they understand, like for their interests, right? Gaming or publishing or art. So that's like one thing. And then ultimately, like, yeah, we can say like it's easy to transact, gas fees are low, yada, yada, but it still is very scary to do these kinds of things, and just hand-holding people through it is like super helpful. So if somebody comes up to you and is like, how do I mint an NFT? Like, in my mind, don't send them to an article, just show them. If you know how to do it, just show them, and that takes time, and I get it. But that's the easiest way to do it, because even if the article says press the button, it is intimidating to press the button when you're talking about crypto, and because crypto is money. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yes, I think, I personally have talked to a lot of poets who are more from the serious literary side of the world, and they're really interested in the possibility of selling poems because, it's not a great surprise to anyone. Poetry is not a lucrative profession. It's pretty much impossible. I can speak from experience to make a living as a poet. I mean, even if you're selling a collection of poems, you're not really going to make anything. If you place a poem in a magazine, you're either going to do it for free or maybe make $10 or $20. So I think there's a real interest from a lot of poets to figure out how to do this so they can actually make the work they want to make and support themselves. And I think it's really important, to empower writers to do that, because there are a lot of voices that are not being heard in the traditional publishing system and that are not being heard, in the world of poetry now. So I think it's really important. But at the same time, a lot of the poets that I've talked to will just kind of, when I say, well, what do you think about making an NFT of your poem? They kind of look at me and they're like, well, what would that even be? Like, what do I have to do? Would it literally just be like me making a PDF of this and then putting it online somewhere? And I think another level of this kind of hand-holding and education is to think and talk and workshop with writers about what a literary NFT could be. It doesn't have to be a PDF of something. It could be an interactive website. It could be a never-ending poem that changes every time you access the NFT in your wallet. It could be something that plays with the metadata or that plays with the hash, or there's lots of different things that it could be, and I think that's something that most writers don't know anything about. And once they start kind of getting a little peek into that world, they get super excited about it. But until someone's there to kind of bring them over and show them, it's not really going to happen. So I agree with you. I think,
Right.
a lot of that kind of one-on-one work is good. And actually, that's what we're doing a lot of at the Verse at this poetry gallery too. Is instead of having traditional poetry workshops where we're journaling and all that, like we're having workshops where we're actually onboarding writers in the world of Web3 literature and publishing. So yeah, I think it's just sort of continuing to do that and build out those kinds of programs.
Right. Yeah. We have just a couple minutes. I feel like we haven't really talked about anything, but we've talked about so much. But I want to keep going. But I wanted to open it up. If there are questions, please let me know. Yeah. Okay.
So my question is, a lot of what we're seeing in NFTs, like the art is kind of an anchor that a bunch of other stuff hangs off of, like membership in a group, or like the holder gets access to bonus content, that kind of stuff. Are you seeing poets thinking about it that way? And are poets introducing new ways of doing that the artists are going to copy from?
Yes, they're starting to. I mean, and again, like the poetry community, I think, generally speaking, is very small, but growing. But we are starting to see people who are doing things like using a token as a subscription for an NFT zine, for example, or starting to think about using a token as access to like a poetry festival or a poetry party. So I think things like that are starting to happen. It's still, I think, really, really early days, but for sure. And I think that's, again, part of, just rethinking what it means to be a writer and a poet. It doesn't have to be just this one thing. It can be, you can think about it as, being someone who's bringing together communities and creating, hybrid events, or you can think about exhibiting alongside artists, taking a poem, out of the realm of pure literature and actually taking a poetry NFT and exhibiting it, in crypto voxels in a cool art museum or something like that. So I think there's lots of ways to take, like that notion that a poem is like this one thing and turn it into many, many other possibilities. And yeah, it's starting to happen, but we'll see a lot more, I think, happen over the next few years.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, that's somewhere that I'm thinking about, because I'm not trying to, at least right now, I'm not trying to number go up my NFTs. I want them to be more like collaborative creation, or just like collaboration with other folks. And so, yeah, the idea that somebody has these word NFTs that I created and then can pin those poems that they create to IPFS, it's like, okay, what can I do with that now, right? If I have their ETH address and I know who saved that poem, is there a way to then airdrop them another poem, right? And so it sort of becomes this little community. But yeah, I think we're all thinking through
Yeah,
those
I
things.
mean, your project has been so fun. I mean, I've had such a great time playing with it, and it's not necessarily a way that I would have necessarily thought about writing poetry on my own, but the fact that you've now enabled me to interact with other poets through this little ecosystem that you've created, I think is really exciting. And who knows where that will lead. I think it's bringing a lot of poets together, from around the globe are able to converge through your project. And I think that might lead to some other sort of offline activations too. So I think that's the sort of excitement that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, totally. Is there one more question before I hand it off? Okay. Yeah.
I really love the idea of collaborative creation, and when you mentioned your project, I went, yes, that is awesome, I love it. Do you have any more examples of kind of collaborative cooperation projects you've seen in the space or the NFT space more broadly?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example of one in the poetry space specifically, but there was a really big project that launched last year called Ether Poems. And basically, it was a collective of poets who came together and created a collaborative split contract, and they minted poems on this smart contract together as a unit, basically. And because it was like show of force, right? Rather than each one of them kind of sending off NFTs into the void, they came together and they really like built a whole kind of community. They rallied influencers. It was actually an initiative started by someone named Digital Art Chick, who some of you may have heard of, who's a big influencer in the space. But she kind of rallied all her friends around, and it really turned this rather modest selection of NFT poems into a major event, and it became a big deal. It sold out in less than 10 hours, and every poet who is involved in that collaboration is now, part of that contract forever and will be receiving royalties forever, which is a pretty astonishing thing to think about as a poet. So, yeah, and that's an example of, again, like strength in numbers and what happens when, you're able to collaborate, through blockchain.
Totally. I would just mention the group ambition.whatthefuck.wtf. They have a project called The Worm. This is not poetry, and I don't even know if they'd call it art really, but you are disciples to the worm. It's sort of like religious iconography kind of stuff, although it's a worm. And the NFT, it's just one NFT that moves, but when that NFT moves, it leaves a hologram in the wallet that transacted it. So you still have an NFT, you just have the hologram NFT. And I think that's pretty interesting because it's, I don't want to give away the worm, right? I want the worm NFT, but it allows me to collaborate with other folks because I know I'm going to get the hologram. So people will still know that I've had the worm. And the Ambition crew is they're really, they are innovating on smart contracts instead of just the art or the poetry or the yada yada. Like they are in the trenches innovating on the tech. And so definitely check those folks out. But yeah, I think that's all the time we have. If anybody wants a poetry book, there's the QR code to scan and get some NFTs. I have to manually do it. That's another tech hurdle, is I have to manually send them one by one. So give me a minute once you fill out the form. But yeah.
You should all ask Bailey for one of these books. They're really amazing. They're all kind of hand done with these amazing tech details. They're little bits of e-waste that she's repurposed into this hand-bound book. So they're really special. I would highly recommend you pick one up. I would also recommend, if you'll indulge me for 1 second, I have a book coming out next month, actually. It's called Technology, and it ties together with my crypto practice. If you are interested, it should be available on Amazon next month. And Ray Kurzweil likes it, so you might like it too. And that's it. Thank you so much for indulging us in our poetry talk.
Yeah.